Right, today on Fitness Freedom, I have Michela Giordano Castro. She is a licensed clinical social worker specializing in treating trauma and eating disorders using internal family systems therapy. She's also a spiritual coach who helps women heal from religious trauma, navigate family dynamics, and discover authentic spirituality beyond traditional doctrines. That's lovely. I'm so glad that you're here, Michela. I'm excited to talk with you and have this discussion. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Excited.
hmm Yeah. So we were just sharing a little bit about the weather differences. Can you tell us where you are and what the weather is like there?
Yes, I am in Houston, Texas area, Crosby really, but yeah, we've already got the warm weather here. There's still some ups and downs. Sometimes we'll get a surprise of cold, but I think it's about 65-ish right now, high of 85 today. So definitely the warmer weather here.
Yeah, I'm jealous. It's like 30s, high of 40. So I'll channel some of the warmth over there on this episode. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know it's a broad question, but especially like your experience with religion and the work you do now, your story, just anything you would like to share so we know a little bit more about you.
Yeah, I guess I can kind of touch on how, and feel free to ask any questions, but yeah, my focuses are in the areas of spirituality within coaching and then eating disorders and trauma within my therapy work. And the reasons for that, I would say, are because I struggled a lot with body image and relationship with food. And so there's a lot of interest in learning about, what helps with that and a lot of passion in helping people with that as, I've had my own struggles. And so that's, kind of how that came about. And, within the trauma, I would say, I did grow up very religious. There was a lot of passion within religion while I was religious, a lot of desire to help people. And I ended up eventually just not feeling able to continue in those beliefs and still holding that desire, though, to help people. And that was a way I felt like, very drawn to do so instead of like trying to save people from hell to help them. It was more, help them heal from their trauma. So that's another passion of mine. And within the spirituality coaching, a similar thing element of wanting to help people, but with that, it relates to my story of post religion. I was agnostic for 10 years, didn't want to touch spirituality with a 10-foot pole, and eventually I healed from that as well. And I mean, nothing's ever maybe 100% healed when it comes to any of these topics, but a lot of healing has occurred. And I have a relationship with spirituality now. And I have a passion for helping others do the same because I know for a lot of people, I mean, some people, it's not like this, but for many people I've seen in like a bunch of deconstruction groups online and different things like this, that a lot of people have a lot of fear around spirituality after feeling really convinced of a particular religion and then losing their faith in that religion. A lot of people just kind of shut down to that. And I know that was my experience for 10 years. And so that's where that passion lies.
Yeah, I can relate to that because you go from like this strict religion, at least in my case, and I'm sure you can relate, where um, there's so many rules, and then you are hesitant to get into spirituality because you're afraid you might go back almost, or it might be the same thing, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like in the same category almost. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and if you listen to this podcast, listeners know that I definitely bring up spirituality because we're whole beings, we're spiritual beings in human bodies.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, super relevant. But what was it that, like, can you share a little bit more about what your religious upbringing was like? Like what sect, what kind of religion, and like what was it that made you leave? Like what was the impetus to like get you out of it?
Mm. Yeah, so I grew up within the Church of Christ, and my Church of Christ Church in Sugar Land, Texas, was not a very strict Church of Christ Church. There's some sects out there that are a lot more strict. So, it wasn't super oppressive, to be honest. Now, there were groups of people within the church who wanted things to be more legalistic. I spoke to a youth pastor that was my youth pastor when I was in middle school. He reached out, kind of seeing the work that I'm doing, and we chatted about it. And he reminded me about how in that time there were some families who wanted things to be more strict than what they were within what was being taught in youth group and that kind of thing. So I had like a little bit of both. I was also homeschooled, and so especially within that community, there was a lot more of like the legalism and like the literalism around the Bible and that kind of thing. It's interesting because I've actually experienced public school, private school, and homeschooling. My public schooling was or my private schooling was when I was in Italy. My dad's Italian, and we lived there for a while. And I went to a Catholic private school run by nuns. So that was an interesting year. But when we moved back to America, prior to that, I was elementary school, public school. My mom decided she liked homeschooling. And so there was a lot of co-ops in my area. So we were engaging with a lot of other people, but again, all within that more legalistic, religious kind of beliefs. And in the co-ops, we had different classes and they would teach us those things. So again, in my church, there was a lot of people who were more, um, oof, I mean, the word coming to mind is like that lukewarm Christianity.
Okay.
Um,
Liberal maybe or more relaxed, more casual.
Yeah, yeah, which I mean, now I see as like a positive, but at the time it was like, oh no, that's not right. But I had a lot of exposure to the opposite. So for me personally, I had a lot of passion around religion, like I mentioned, and I wanted to do things, the right way. I wanted to not, upset God and how I lived, but honor God and these different things. So even within like my own family, I was even more literal and legalistic than even some of my family members because of what I was being taught in my classes, as well as just like my own understanding of spirituality through religion and that kind of thing.
Mhm. Okay. And what was it that brought you out of it? Like what made you second guess things?
Mm, right, yeah. So that was a journey because I mentioned we lived in Italy for a while. While we were there, my dad was the pastor of the Church of Christ in our town. And so, growing up, we always went to church every Sunday. For a while, my dad was the pastor. When we moved back, it was a lot of just searching within religion on my dad's side. So it was always within the confines, for lack of a better word, of like believing in God and Jesus. But again, in the efforts to find out how God really wanted us to live, we went from continuing with the same church originally when we got back to starting to do home church, and sometimes that would be with other families as well. Then there was the interpretation that what God really wanted was for us to be Messianic Jews, and so we did that for a while. And that's like basically following Jewish law for the most part, but believing that Jesus is the Messiah kind of a thing. And so all my life, this was our world. And when I was 16, while we were within this Messianic Jewish belief system, you're honoring the Sabbath. And I decided for myself on the Sabbath, and this kind of ties into the food stuff, I would fast from food as well as like anything worldly. So I would only engage in like, religious books or music and these kinds of things. But I heard my parents talking in the living room, and I'd been in my room, and I was like, I'm gonna go see what they're talking about. Again, my dad, he's Italian. He had time as a pastor. He's a big talker, and so it was not uncommon that he'd be like having his own like little sermon kind of a thing in the living room. And so I went in there and sat down, and I don't remember the exact words, but I picked up on the conversation and I understood that my dad was saying that God wasn't real and that, if you follow religion, you're being brainwashed. And I was so shocked. I was so jarred because that was such a contrast to my whole life that I literally questioned my own hearing, my ears. I was like, how is this possible? But that kind of started that path. It's not like, oh, he doesn't believe, so I don't believe. And even with the changes we made within religion, I would always be resistant, but then I would see where he was coming from with his explanations, and I would understand, and I would be on board that, okay, yeah, this is a good change for us, or a righteous change, we could say. So, yeah, it was a 2-year journey after that. For a while there, I was debating my dad a lot. I have those genes as well. And then also within those religious homeschooled classes, we were taught apologetics, the defense of the faith. We were really, really taught to see this as like complete truth. And so I felt prepared and I was like, part of me almost like enjoyed the process, but never at the end of it. It almost always ended in frustration and tears. But there was like a time where I was just kind of challenging him. And then I think it just got to be just all those doubts implanted, which at the time, or actually even for a while, I was resentful of. But now, I'm grateful because, I mean, if you think about it, if your whole environment is saying this is true, of course you're going to believe it's true. I mean, there are those who doubt it anyway, and that's cool. But the way the brain works is the brain takes the path most traveled. So I had never experienced that level of challenge with these beliefs. And so with those challenges and kind of doubts in my mind, it was something I was kind of processing a lot. But I really, really wanted to remain Christian because I really thought that this is the best way to live. I had even seen those arguments in some like religious books of like, even if we're wrong, we're happier than other people. So like, who cares? Like, whatever. So I really fought to keep it, and eventually I got to the point where it was just not possible. I can't remember the exact like reasons, but I just fought it for 2 years and went back and forth, and eventually I reached a point where I was like, I can't force this anymore. I have to just be honest with myself. Like, I don't believe this anymore. I did have the belief that God is love. And, I never had the belief, even within religion, that, God is this like mean, judgmental being that some people do see God as. And so I did believe that, like, I have to be honest with myself. And if God is out there, He knows that I would do anything to serve Him. I mean, that was my plan. My plan was to be a missionary. Like,
Mhm.
it wouldn't make any sense if this whole story is true that God would just let me fall away without helping me. And so I just decided, I'm letting go. What happens, happens. And over time, there was a lot of processing and healing of the grief and even anger with all of that. And then 10 years later, I've found faith again, but in a different kind of construct. And here we are.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like your family, it was the environment you grew up in. Your dad was really into it. And then when he started expressing doubts, it put a bug in your ear to start rethinking things. And it's a process. It's like everything you know, I can relate to that. It's like you don't know anything else when you're a kid. That's the environment you grow up in, and that's what your parents say. And it's right. And for me, it took a lot of, I think coming out was a big kind of like a questioning moment, and as well as things just like stopped making sense. It wasn't like a one time thing,
Exactly.
like you said, it was a process.
Mhm.
But I'm really curious because you do work with people with eating disorders and like body image. I'm really curious from your perspective, both as a professional and personally, like how have those like religious ideas and beliefs and cultures affected your views on your body? How did it affect as a choices you made for your body in terms of like food or movement or health even? Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, there was a really strong impact with all of that. You know, I'm not gonna like blame it on my Italian culture because it's absolutely present in America too. But just from a young age, there was a lot of emphasis on, being thin and looking good and looking good meaning being thin, which is absolutely not,
Yeah,
a
right.
qualifying factor by any means. But and so yeah, even at like a really young age, I started to have some feelings around my body and growing up and religion became more of my own thing versus like my family's thing when I was 11, which is another pretty significant age for a lot of girls starting to kind of see their bodies differently, going through puberty, all these things. And yeah, there was a lot of difficulty there. I don't know if you've heard of this, but well, I'm blanking on her name now. Her name is Gwen something, and she created the Way Down diet, and it's like a spiritual, it's like a religious diet system. Uh,
Oh.
and my family was engaged in that for a while. Basically, it's almost like intuitive eating, except with like religious pressure around it, and like that kind of. So like it takes this like healthy thing and makes it toxic. Yeah, yeah. So there were like these videos we would watch, and yeah, she would talk about like eating when you were hungry and stopping when you were full, but there wasn't a lot of grace around it. It was a lot of like, you have to do it right and listen to your body, and if you overeat, you're sinning, and these types of things. Um, so that was something my family did, I think when I was like 13 or so. And then, my family went through a lot of phases with all kinds of things, diets, obviously within sects of religion, um, other topics too, like hobbies and all kinds of stuff. But so that eventually phased out. But I held on to some of those, beliefs, some guilt around that of, if I ever eat when I'm not hungry or eat beyond fullness, like I'm sinning and I'm displeasing God. And I struggled with it, within that belief system. For some people, these types of beliefs can lead them to be really strict. For some people like me, it can lead to like almost like a cognitive shutdown and just kind of like binge eating, zoning out, that sort of thing. So so that definitely had an influence on things, and yeah, there was so much shame
Yeah.
around around food, around my body. I would try to restrict to make up for the binges, and it was just a terrible, terrible cycle, and so much hate, for my body, for the choices I was making, and in my mind, oh, I'm making these choices and they're the wrong choices, and it was not a time I would like to go back to.
Yeah, yeah. It's like supposedly intuitive, but it's actually not intuitive because you are imposing rules. I remember a time in my own recovery when I was like, oh, intuitive. I wanted to learn how to eat normally because I was also affected by my parents also, my family did like first place diet. It was like put your body first. Your body's a temple, that kind of mindset. Definitely diet culture and how I grew up and related to religion, like you said. And I remember reading intuitive eating books, and it was like I replaced the rules that I had for food based on like numbers or portions or calories or whatever, and replaced it with intuitive eating rules, like you said, like if you do eat past fullness, you've sinned or you've done something wrong. It's the same, it's
Mhm.
that's why the how and the why is so important when you're working with food and your health. But what can you speak? You said something really interesting about the cognitive dissonance and like kind of shutting off with your body. How do you think that was related to like your religious experiences or how you grew up. Like what, I know we can all do that regardless of our upbringing, but like what was it that made that accessible or easy or like a go-to for you?
Mm,
Shutting it off, the shutting off, the
mm.
dissonance.
Yeah. Well, what comes to mind is how, there is literal identity in, religion for a lot of people. And that was my situation too. Like, this was my identity. This was, my source of purpose, of joy, of love, of peace, of all these different things. And so if I'm doing something that isn't, aligning with what my logical side knows to be right according to that structure, like there's not harmony there. And so to cope, there's like a part of me, I think, that would just kind of, compartmentalize, shut down, and close off to that. Because at the same time, there was this pain of, worrying if I was doing things right, wanting, more happiness, more, unity, and not having that. And, I wouldn't do the more, I mean, in my, religious sect, the more like clear sins, quote unquote, of like sex or drugs or alcohol or whatever, I would instead, just turn to food. And so this was like a tool to find that pleasure and find that just kind of ability to kind of zone out. And you can't do that in peace. Like this, the desire is to find some peace, but you can't feel that peace if you're thinking about how wrong it is. So on a level, there is like that cognitive shutdown, and then of course, eventually you wake back up and you feel it anyway, all that shame and whatever. But I do think that that is kind of how that can come about.
Yeah, that's such a good way to explain it. It's like a coping mechanism. Like you needed some relief from all of that pressure to do things right or to feel that or feel that feeling of shame or like constantly following the rules. And that was kind of an outlet or a place where you could kind of shut off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. You were just trying to cope with the situation you were in. And your body was probably hungry too if you did have some restriction, like there's
Very
an
true.
obvious, it's like if you're
Mm-hmm.
tired, you need sleep. If you're hungry, you need food. And then
Yeah.
the shame just makes it so gnarly. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially
Yeah.
that cycle that can be created. It's so true. Like you you get trapped in this cycle because there's the binge and then the shame and the restriction, which just leads to another binge and it goes over and over.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Shame is what perpetuates it.
Mm-hmm.
So, you also, I want to move into like your work with clients and the ways, the tools that you have used for yourself, even that you use with clients to help them. Can can we talk about internal family systems? That's something that you incorporate first. Like, what is it, and how do you use it to help clients with their own like disordered eating, or body image, or exercise behaviors in a way that helps? And I think you even alluded to it with like the different parts that you were explaining. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love talking about this. So internal family systems therapy is an evidence-based therapy, and it involves this kind of theory, for lack of a better word. It's like an approach to therapy to viewing the mind that sees the mind as a multi-mind, is what they call it. So instead of seeing the mind as like one unified structure, we have parts. So this is not dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called multiple personality disorder, because in that kind of situation, it's like you lose yourself when a different part takes over. But with, yeah, based on whoever the part is there, you kind of lose the others for the most part. But with internal family systems therapy, also called IFS, um, it's this viewpoint that it's not, quote unquote, just people who experience very severe trauma that have a multi mind. It's everyone. We all have a multi mind. We're all dynamic people. A simple example I like to give is like, I might say, and it might be very true, that like, oh, so and so, part of me loves her, part of me can't stand her. It's that kind of idea. We have parts, we're dynamic. And so with IFS, it simply makes it more clear. It helps us kind of get more clarity around our different parts. And through that, we can have more awareness of when a part is taking over. Another important element to it is this idea that we also all have what they call self energy. So, this was discovered because actually the creator of it was working in an eating disorder clinic or hospital. And, that's how this actually came to be, was working with eating disorder patients. And what he found, Dr. Richard Schwartz, is that when people were feeling more healed, were not struggling with behaviors that weren't healthy or that they didn't really want, they would say things like, I feel more like myself. So the self energy was identified. And that's the goal of IFS, is to be more self-led versus parts-led. And parts are basically elements of the psyche that our system develops in order to protect us. So at some point in time, it served a purpose, kind of like how we talked about, my binge part, let's say, was helping me to find some peace in, the chaos and confusion of what's the right thing to do and blah, blah, blah. And so with this work with eating disorder patients and clients, what we do is we explore, what's going on, what kind of thoughts come up, what kind of feelings come up, how can you tell that there is a part kind of taking over, and we get more clarity around that so that when there is a part that's trying to cause a disruptive behavior, let's say, there we can build that awareness of, instead of like, I'm so terrible, why am I doing this, we shift to, oh hey, so and so part, I realize you're trying to help me. Let's talk about this. Let's do an exercise to get what you're really wanting. We get more clarity what they're really wanting. Maybe it's peace, maybe it's to protect from being abandoned, maybe it's whatever it might be. You can do some work to kind of help them with that in the moment. And then you can remind them, like, you can trust me. Thank you for trying to take over to help, but I've got this. And we kind of go from there.
That is such a good description. I've never heard it. Is he the guy who writes the book No Bad Parts? Is that
Mhm.
the book? Okay, it's on my to listen, my wish list. That's such a great way of explaining it. Thank you. So I guess when people do have that, like maybe that urge to binge or maybe do something that's unhealthy or unhelpful for them, they instead of seeing it as themselves, like, oh, this is who I am and this is me, they have more of a distance and awareness of like, oh, this is a part of me that I can choose to not let rule my choices.
Yeah, it's that awareness of, this is a part of me that, first of all, again, yes, it's the part. It's not the self, because otherwise you would be happy with it. But we're not. Like, deep down, we don't want to do these things, and yet we feel like we can't stop ourselves. But if we recognize, oh, this is a part and it's trying to help me, and we shift to, how can I help them? How can I help this part of my psyche? Because another significant point to all of this is that our parts, the way the brain works and everything, our parts don't understand that we're no longer in that original situation that made them think we needed this behavior or this way of thinking or whatever the case might be. And so we kind of try to get grounded and centered and remember, what it is to be in that self energy, which is to, there's 8 C's and 5 P's, and I'll name a couple I can remember, but kind of basically it's like, to feel calm and have clarity and courage and creativity and compassion, perspective, playfulness. These are some of the things that, signify the self. But if we're being, directed by fear or anger or sadness, those are automatic signs that a part's taking over. And when we can build that awareness to just pause and check in with the part, remind the part that, hey, what you're scared is going to happen isn't going to happen, because you can trust me to find, a better way of avoiding that. It's going to be okay. You do your regulating tools. There's a lot less shame, but also a lot more effectiveness in that not taking over versus hating that side of ourselves or fighting it, then we get into this internal battle that we always feel like we're losing, and then there's just more shame.
Yeah. Yeah. So you said self-image, is that what it is?
Self
This
energy.
self-energy. Okay. Yeah, I'm thinking about in my work too, what I've seen with clients is like I encourage people to connect with themselves. Like, who are you outside of this? Or who are you? What do you really like? Like, how do you like to play? Connecting with yourself, like your spirit or as, yeah, self-energy. Like, who are you before this or outside of this? And the more you kind of foster that and feed that, the less those other parts can take over, the more aware of them you can be from that place. And that's really the core of, like health and fitness too, is like connecting with yourself, connecting with who you really are. And from that place, making choices that are beneficial for you, not following those rules or those voices or those parts, but what do I need? What do I want? What is good for my body? Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, that's so cool. That's so cool. So body image, you mentioned when you were young, and I know like thin is always more attractive, which is not true. But how do you help your clients with like the body image aspect? And is it related to IFS or do you use other tools that help them? Because body image is such a big topic, but
Mhm.
well, let me ask you first, like when with your clients or with your in your experience, like what are some common issues or concerns that people have when they come to you or that they bring up in with your in your work? And then like how do you help them?
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because, sometimes we think that eating disorders are kind of cut and dry. Like you're either maybe anorexic or you struggle with binge eating, but there's a lot more complexity to them, which even I didn't realize until I got into it. There are a lot of people who I've worked with who simply struggle with just like the process of eating, because of their trauma, even though they're not thinking about anything related to it, they just feel this like sense of unsafety around food, which makes it hard to like literally physically eat, even if they want to gain weight or, aren't worried about their body image or anything like that. Um, of course, there are the people who do struggle with body image and struggle with binging and restricting. That does occur a lot. And then, of course, there is anorexia where there's that, conscious, intentional. I wouldn't actually say conscious because, consciousness is more self-led, but there's a part that chooses for them to avoid food out of fear and these kinds of
Mhm.
things. And IFS, again, it was created to treat eating disorders originally, and it's been shown to be really effective for trauma as well. And there are other studies showing that it helps even, in other areas, but those are the two main areas for IFS. And so IFS is used, so kind of exploring, the different views around whatever the struggle is. Okay, yes, there is a part of you that maybe wants to avoid food, let's say, but let's explore. Usually we'll find there's another part, or in this case the self, that wants a healthy relationship with food, that wants to nourish their body and have energy and not feel fear over food or different things like this. So IFS is absolutely used. Other techniques that I use and that have also really, really helped me on my journey with body image are actual like affirmations. And, affirmations aren't the solution to everything, but there is a reality that the brain takes the path most traveled. Our brain has, so many neural pathways. And if you have this neural pathway that says, my body's disgusting, for example, and it's practice, taking down that pathway thousands and thousands of times, that pathway is going to be really strong. It's going to be really wide and clear and open, and your brain's going to just be like, okay, let's just do what's normal. Let's go into the routine and give ourselves this kind of narrative. So if we practice affirmations, it helps to build new neural pathways. And the more we practice them, the more clear those neural pathways become and the stronger they are. And the more we refrain from using the others, which isn't, it isn't like a conscious choice that we can necessarily make. our brain's going to take that old pathway automatically. But the key is to notice, oh wait, I just said that again. That doesn't reflect who I really am or what I really want, or that's not coming from self. And just noticing that and choosing to then practice the other no pathway. I love myself, whatever it is you want to use. And sometimes people need to work up to some of those. But I know for myself, I actually was introduced to this by my dad. He told me about this practice of looking in the mirror and saying, I love myself. And I thought that was the most ridiculous thing that I had ever heard. I thought it was foolish, embarrassing,
Awkward, right?
you know. Yeah, especially with that, religious background, because I remember literally thinking like, that doesn't seem right. That seems selfish. And who cares if I love myself? I just need God to love me and,
Yes.
to love other people and that kind of thing.
Yes.
But, eventually I just was so unhappy that I was like, who cares? I'm just going to try it, whatever. And so I began practicing this, telling myself I love myself, telling myself I'm beautiful. And it felt like the biggest lie and so ridiculous. But over time, it's something that honestly I'm comfortable with. And it doesn't mean I don't have my days of, poor image and whatnot, but it's something I can turn to. So practicing those or those affirmations is something I really encourage to work on this, as well as also exposure. If we're used to seeing one type of body, one type of,
Mhm.
height and race and whatever, it's natural again that we're going to think that's what's good or that's what's attractive. And so, again, this is something that also helped me just having more exposure to, bigger bodies and different size bodies and being able to say like they are beautiful. Like I truly see that and believe that. So why can't I believe that about myself? And so
Mhm.
that's another thing I also recommend.
I like that so much. Affirmations, yeah. My I think what is the key to all of this, and especially the first two, like the mirror and the affirmations, is kind of that, again, going back to like what you said, the self energy, right? The self energy. It's like your awareness, like where are you pointing and shining your awareness on things? And if you're so used to just like looking in one corner of the room, like, oh, I'm like so ugly or I'm so fat or whatever, those words, that's all you're seeing. But you can kind of step back and then turn around and be like, oh, there are other options that I can connect with. And if you can feel, like in at least in my experience, if you can feel what those words are and get to a point where you can kind of, oh, I am beautiful and feel it from the inside, it's so, so
Mm-hmm.
powerful. But sometimes it does start with the external, just like, I'm beautiful, I'm beautiful. Like you don't even feel it. It doesn't even make sense. Like looking in the mirror, like, oh, this is ridiculous. But the more you practice it, the more your awareness has like a muscle of turning to
Exactly.
another spot. And then this muscle becomes weaker, the one looking in that dark corner. I did an
Yeah.
episode actually of like a mirror practice, like a couple episodes ago, and how powerful that is. So I appreciate you sharing that. And then the exposure. Oh yeah, the exposure, because like social media, like it depends, the algorithms kind of give you what you feed you what
Mhm.
you want to see yourself
Engagement
feed.
and
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And like because I'm always interested in like fitness and what's going on in the culture. There's so much like there's in fitness largely it's mostly white, thin tone, able-bodied, straight women, at least for women who are very jacked and they're like talking about their fitness journeys. But it's so, so, so important representation and like that the bad thing is that social media will feed you what's most common. The good news is that you can actively search out, like other accounts are more like body accepting accounts or different body types. And like you said, noticing the beauty in them and then reflecting that back in how you see yourself.
yeah, and blocking or just like noting and not interested in this for the things that aren't serving you. It's like you don't need to spend your time seeing that. You don't need to be following someone if it's just making you feel bad about yourself every time you see their content. So really just choosing yourself in that way and being intentional about your time on social media can really make a big difference.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like what you're saying, the essence of like what you've been saying in all of this is like kind of this sense of like stepping back and not just taking everything that's around you as truths and just kind of like stepping back and like noticing, oh, do I really believe this? Do I really? And choosing different pathways that are more helpful for you. And often, like you said, it comes from this place of like, I'm miserable. I don't like this. I don't feel good and I need to change, I don't know what always, but you've given so many good tools and like options for if someone does want that change, what they can do. So I kind of want to ask this from your opinion, because there are people who listen to this who, are in different ranges. Maybe they're like heavy into fitness culture. Maybe they're like, oh, I do have some issues that I'm working through. I want to feel more free in my body. I want to feel better about food and exercise. Um, if they're like struggling and they're not sure what to do, what is the best, I guess, best piece of advice or pieces of advice you could give to someone who maybe is, I mean, even in religion right now or is recovering from religion and like all the shit that comes with it? Like, what would you advise people to do?
When recovering from religion or struggling with like food and body.
Well, both, yeah. We can put that into two different questions.
I mean, it could be the same because actually, even with what you ended with before that question, I think that is so foundational to any kind of change is starting with awareness. Just trying to get out of just the automatic surviving, getting through your day, consuming what you usually consume content wise or whatever, talking to, talk to, all that. And just having that awareness of, how does this make me feel? Or how do I feel around this? And that includes what's going on within us. So noticing our thoughts, we will have thoughts even just automatically, but that doesn't mean we can't pause and notice, oh, my brain just said that. And is that is that something that I agree with or something that is helping me with my goal of feeling differently in this area? So having that awareness, and from there, exploring, working with maybe, a therapist or a coach, or even just, getting a book at the library. So that's all you can do right now. And getting more exposure to other viewpoints. Again, like we talked about, if we're stuck in this one way of view because of our family or society, it's not easy to get out of that just within ourselves if we're not getting like a little bit of support from other sources. It can be really helpful. Um, so yeah, just really having that awareness, and then ultimately, I would also say having that mindset of, choosing yourself and not just, shrugging your shoulders to the things that aren't sitting right with you. Just honor yourself and love yourself enough to be like, this maybe isn't working for me. Let me do the brave thing and face change. Because even when it comes to things like, again, like the food and body stuff, on some level, we might want change, like let's say a healthy relationship with food or with exercise. But we have our parts that don't want us to change because according to our parts that don't have perspective, they all they see is, you know, my person is alive. And so let's stick with what we know. It's like that saying, the brain will always prefer a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. So
Mhm.
change could be your ticket out of that suffering, but you're gonna probably feel a lot of resistance to it because your parts are like, that's foreign. I don't know what to expect there. And so I would rather make things the same. So also just awareness within that and finding different ways to help feel safe, help yourself feel safe, your parts feel safe, and ultimately, choosing and loving yourself.
Thank you. That's so beautiful. Awareness, exposure, and really trusting yourself and being like, I don't like this. I want something. And I think that's the core of change is like the the cons just start to drastically outweigh the pros of whatever pattern you're in and you're like I don't know what to do but I need to do something and you've experienced that obviously like it's I don't, if people who have experienced religion and like grew up in that and then shifted can understand and relate to this and what you're saying. It is so difficult to like completely shift your identity. It takes so much inner work. It takes so much like being with yourself and questioning that some people, good for them, like they don't have to make those huge shifts in their lives. Everyone changes, but you know what I mean? Like that drastic of a change. And like I can relate to you. Like I've changed in so many ways my identity and it's almost like you become a new person each time you do
Mhm.
that. And that's not easy. It's like a death and a rebirth,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Right? So kudos to all of us who have done that and make those changes. But that's really what it is like it's an identity change, an awareness change, even with like eating disorders and exercise behaviors. And often like that's what keeps people stuck is like there's they enjoy the identity of it um
Mhm.
more
There's
than yeah.
that comfort in the identity, the
Yeah,
familiarity.
sure. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and no shame. I mean, that's what it is. And that's why exposing yourself to other influences where people are living, thriving, happy, joyful can be so motivating for change. Yeah, like going to the library, maybe finding a book of someone who's done what you want to do.
Mhm.
Yeah, this is so, so good. I want to ask one more question. I ask all of my guests this. Um, if you had a microphone and you could share one message about health, about fitness, well-being with the entire world, all 8.5 billion, I think, currently, people. What would you say, Michaela?
The first thing that came to mind is to, come from a place of love with your choices. So often we come from a place of fear. And what's so interesting is that that can make something healthy even detrimental to our health if we're consuming it from that place of fear. So coming from a place of love with all our decisions for how we move our bodies, how we eat, and sometimes that might look, a little differently than the mainstream health or what's perfectly healthy, but we're coming from that place of love, and especially in my experience I've seen this eventually we'll get there. I've had to kind of go off the deep end in the opposite way and just be like, I'm going to eat whatever I want, and I'm
Hmm.
going to even not exercise for a while
Hmm.
just to help heal that relationship. And then because that was an act of love for myself for a time, and once that kind of helped clear some things out for me, now I have a much better relationship with in those areas, and I am eating things for how it makes me feel, and I'm enjoying my relationship with exercise. I look forward to it. And sometimes you got to just kind of do what's not stereotypical, but from that place of love.
Yes, I love that so much. That's so true. The how and the why is often just as important, if not more, as the what you're doing. So this has been so good. I appreciate you sharing all of your insights, your expertise in such an eloquent and calm and um, listenable, I don't know if that's the right word, but listenable way. So where can people find you if they want to connect with your work? I know you do coaching, spirituality, if they want to connect and go into your world a little bit more, where can they find you? What's the
Yeah.
best?
So, as mentioned, I'm in Texas and I am accepting clients for therapy. So, if you're in Texas and you're looking for a therapist for eating disorders, you can find me on Psychology Today. I believe on there I'm L. Michela Giordano. Um, that's my legal name. Castro, I got married, but I haven't changed it officially yet.
Oh, okay.
Um, and then, if you're just interested in following me in general or seeing my content around spirituality, I'm Michela Giordana Castro on Facebook. That's also my handle on Instagram. And then on YouTube and TikTok, my handle is Michaela's Mind Munchies, just like all put together. So yeah, love to see you.
Cool. Yeah, and those links will be in the show notes, so they'll be easy to access. You can just click on them and find Michaela and her amazing work. Thank you so much for this incredible conversation. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure.